a photographic history of downtown St. Louis. That's next on City Corner. And welcome to City Corner. Well, a new book shines some light on the history of downtown St. Louis. This is Nene Harris's 13th book. It's called Downtown St. Louis. Nene, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
13 books. A dozen wasn't enough?
Actually, it's 14. I had forgotten one.
Oh, 14.
Yeah.
Over how many years have you been doing this?
Well, I think I started researching them when I was in grade school, frankly.
Okay.
I used to go around to the old folks in the neighborhood and sit there and listen to all their old stories. And so I feel like I've always been doing it.
Well, you've done books kind of about a lot of range of things that have to do with St. Louis. This one focuses on photographs mostly of downtown St. Louis and how it's evolved from just about its beginning to now.
Well, I felt downtown needed the attention. Downtown is fabulous, and many people don't appreciate how rich its history is and how phenomenal its physical built environment is, and how this place has been the stage for great movements in American history. And I thought, boy, St. Louisans really need to think about this and appreciate it.
Where did all these ancient photographs come from? I guess St. Louis Public Library, and where else?
Well, a whole lot from Missouri Historical Society. They have been a great help. And then much of the research, in fact, most of the research came from St. Louis Public Library, the main branch on Olive Street, and that is a phenomenal institution, and their collections are incredible. They're like a university research library.
Mm-hmm. In your book, right in the beginning, near the beginning, you say that St. Louis is more than a striking skyline. What do you mean by that?
It's where lives happen. It's where everybody is connected to it. From the beginning of St. Louis, when it was a village, and everybody lived in what is now downtown, and they farmed much of what is now downtown. That was St. Louis. Everything was downtown. And then through every era, it is this evolving, lively neighborhood. Some eras, it was totally a work neighborhood. Some eras, again, early years, it was a farming neighborhood. There are eras when it's industrial and then office. And now again, it is a residential community. So you have all these people who are so connected with downtown, and then it's this national stage. The role in the nation's history is phenomenal. You just look at the Civil War and what downtown St. Louis did in the Union victory. Abraham Lincoln knew he could not win the Civil War if he didn't have St. Louis supporting the Union forces. You look at the role it played as gateway to the West. You know, all the goods, downtown was like a funnel that all these people and goods went through. The explorers, the missionaries, the soldiers, the miners, the settlers, the cattlemen, you know, the brooms the settler used, the pioneer woman, to sweep out the sod house. They came from St. Louis. You know, everything was coming through St. Louis.
Well, speaking of the early days, let's start there. And we have a couple of images from the book. Let's take a look at the first two. And we begin with I guess, a representation of St. Louis. This next one is a little cabin. And maybe you can tell us what that represents.
Well, that's the Beaujanu house, and that is a drawing of a house that was here in the colonial days. St. Louis was settled by Frenchmen and part of the Spanish colonial empire. And most of the early St. Louisans lived in houses like this. They were built of upright logs set in trenches. They were generally had a rectangular floor plan, and you can see that there is a gallery along one side of the house. And
So this is long before the fancy houses, right?
a few decades before the fancy houses, yeah.
Now we have a map of Old St. Louis.
Well, this shows it in 1804 when we become part of the United States territory, and you can see we have a town design with grid blocks that are often halved or quartered, and the western boundary of the settlement is 4th Street. The western boundary is on the east side of the old courthouse. So
Wow.
you see St. Louis for many years hugged the river, and it just grew north and south along the river. And then west of there was where they were growing maize and wheat, and 1,200 to 1,500 cattle were being grazed.
Apple trees, I think I read in your book.
Apple trees, cherry trees, yes.
So what year is the map again?
1804.
Is there anything in that map, in that area of the map that we just looked at, that's still there today? Nothing.
No. Well, the streets themselves. If you think of it like the streets in Laclede's Landing, when you walk those streets, you're walking streets that were laid out by our French founders in 1764. That's before the American Revolution even started. And you just walk those streets.
Well, in addition to all these fabulous photographs in your book, Nene, there's a lot of history too. And you, at one point, you talk about Auguste Chouteau, describing. He wrote about Pierre Laclede's vision when Pierre Laclede first saw the land that was to become St. Louis.
And he knew, and this is clear, that this was a critical piece of land. If you think about it, there have been two great civilizations here, the mound builders, and they built a city on this spot, a huge settlement, and the American civilization, and we have a great city here. I believe that if all of us would disappear, this site is so geographically important that the next civilization would build a city on the side of downtown St. Louis.
I mentioned Auguste Chouteau, so I just have to ask you, because I've talked to other historians before, and that's the way I pronounce it. Is that the way you really pronounce his name?
I am told that that's not so. However, in 5th grade history at Woodward Grade School, St. Louis Public, we were taught Auguste Chouteau. So in honor of Miss Love, who was a great teacher, I will always say Auguste Chouteau.
Okay, good enough for me.
That's it.
Let's take a look at another image from your book, and this is Old Olive Street.
Isn't that
Somewhere on
wonderful?
Olive, right?
Yes, that's at 3rd and Olive. And that was done by Matthew Hastings, who came here in 1840, and he did a number of drawings and paintings of St. Louis. And his work is so important because it really documents what St. Louis was like during that time when it was transforming still from that early frontier outpost to a big city. And you can see on 3rd Street there, you have a substantial 3-story brick building, but you go up Olive, and there is a little farmhouse with a whole lot of field around it. So it really captures an era that now we can understand better because of this illustration.
Yeah, so St. Louis over a certain amount of years really went from a little fur trading post to, at one time, people referred to it as the Paris of the Midwest, didn't they?
Yes, and I believe it was. Maybe it still is. You know, you think about it, you think of the vibrancy of downtown, you think of our cultural institutions, you think of our symphony orchestra, and again, our built environment, our magnificent parks. Perhaps we should be calling ourselves the Paris of the Midwest now.
I agree with you. We have a picture from your book. This is Charles Dickens. What was Charles Dickens' connection to St. Louis?
Well, he visited here in 1841 when he was doing a 6-month tour of the United States. And then the following year, he published a book, American Notes, in which he wrote about his travels in the U.S., and he wrote about St. Louis. And he wrote very favorably about St. Louis. He stayed at the Planters Hotel and was very impressed with the attention in the Planters Hotel. He wrote about what the French part of the riverfront look like at that time. And he called the buildings, even at that time in the 1840s, he called those buildings ancient. And then he talked about the new American influence in St. Louis. However, he didn't know if we'd ever compare in beauty and stature with Cincinnati.
Well, yeah, I read that. That's pretty funny. I think we did okay. You know, I've talked to a lot of architects over the years, and I think a lot of people in town, in this town, sometimes don't realize when people that know anything about architecture come to St. Louis who've never been here before, they always rave about our architecture.
Oh, they do. In fact, our architecture is like a magnet. And I have a dear friend, Peter Hammond, an architect, who has built his whole life here for decades. And the reason he came here was to see the Wainwright Building. And
First
he
skyscraper,
stayed.
right?
First, spiritually, the first skyscraper, yes. Yeah.
Let's take another look at an image from your book, and this is the Old Riverfront.
Wow. I'm sorry, every time I look at it, I have to respond that way, because you see the energy along that riverfront. At sometimes there were so many boats mooring there that they were too deep. And so to disembark a boat, you had to walk from one boat across a second boat to get to the levee. And then once you were on the levee, you were in between stacks of crates and barrels and bales, and you had to walk paths between them, and there were carriages and wagons and people just hauling things up from the river.
It's like going to the airport today, sort of.
Except it was all sorts of materials. It wasn't just people. And again, you had the horses, you had the people, you had the goods, all different kinds of goods coming from all over.
Let's take a look at this next shot, and this is the Eads Bridge. Now, the Eads Bridge stands out for a couple of historic reasons. Was it the first, I'll get my history right, was it the first bridge across the Mississippi?
You know, I don't know if
I
there
could be wrong about that.
There may have been one further north, or they were trying to build one further north, but the important thing was that here, at this point in the river, it was such a challenge to build one. And this was such an engineering feat for its day. We take it for granted. We just don't realize that at that era, many of the bridges being constructed across the nation were collapsing.
Right.
And many people did not believe it was possible to bridge the Mississippi at St. Louis. Such a challenging undertaking. And Eads was a genius. Eads was a genius and a determined man, and he was a patriot.
Well, you know how wide the river is there, and before the Eads Bridge, you know, that people went across on boats and things. Can you imagine how problematic that was?
They ferried, you think of it, trains came to the East Bank, and then they had to ferry the goods to the West Bank, and then into the warehouses on the West Bank. It really was shutting down St. Louis after trains became the mode of transportation.
Well, you mentioned the Wainwright Building. When we come back from our break, we're going to take a look at that. We're going to continue with this discussion. Our guest is Nene Harris. The book is Downtown St. Louis, and we'll be back right after this.
Experience St. Louis.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. Nene Harris is our guest. Her new book is Downtown St. Louis. It really traces, with photographs and text, the history of a little fur trading town into the major city that it's become. And Nene, a very nice introduction or foreword by Charlie Brennan, my friend at KMOX. And also, Don Cordy is a gentleman that I know, and he's been involved in a number of books, including this one.
Yes, and he is a wonderful photographer, and he helped with the photographic search. The fun thing about working with Don is, you know, downtown is like a part of my fiber from the time I was a little kid. And for Don, it was a mission of discovery. So I got to show him things, and he would go, wow, this is really neat, and be really excited about finding so much beauty in downtown.
Let's take a look at a couple more images from your book, Downtown St. Louis. And you mentioned in the first segment, Nene, the Wainwright Building and the significance as a skyscraper, and it still stands today.
Isn't it spectacular? What a work of art. And Louis Sullivan used the concept of a column to come up for a spiritual design for tall buildings. Before the Wainwright Building, they had figured out how to build buildings taller with steel skeletons and using elevators, but they just look like wedding cakes, many of them, just stacking another floor on top of another, whereas Sullivan celebrated the height by making this look like a column. The lower two floors are like the base of a column. Then you have these stripes like the fluting of a column with the windows and the spaces between the windows. And then the huge cornice is like a capital of a column.
This next image is a street scene in downtown St. Louis. And those ladies out on the town, I guess.
Isn't that fun? They are ladies who work at Brown Shoe, and they're just taking their break. It apparently a lunch break, and I love their hats. I love their joy in walking around the streets. It just brings to life what downtown felt like in different eras.
And let's take a look at this next one, the St. Louis Public Library, which I guess was just a year or two, went through a major renovation.
Yes.
A couple of years.
And we have to look at that for several reasons. One is, so often St. Louisans don't appreciate that we have the finest municipal library system in the United States. It is incredible, and that building is a civic jewel. And it, again, has been beautifully renovated. Now it's lit up at night, so it just glitters. It's a gem in downtown St. Louis.
You know, at some point, as the town began to move away from the river, Lucas Place at some point became a very fancy upscale neighborhood. And I just wanted to read something really quick out of your book where you quote an article from the Post-Dispatch, and it's kind of funny. It's describing Lucas Place, which was located exactly where?
Well, it started right at Lucas Park, right near the library, at 14th Street, and continued west to about 17th.
So this was, I guess, the really first fancy neighborhood, right?
That's right.
And here's what your book says. This was from the Post-Dispatch in whatever year it was. For full 3 blocks, not a shanty rears its head. All the houses are large and handsome. Here's the line I like. It is an intensely quiet spot, and if children live there, they are kept within doors and are never allowed to make mud pies in the gutter.
Isn't that a wild expression? It tells you as much about other neighborhoods as about Lucas Place.
I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah, and it tells you that the city was growing so quickly and downtown was growing so quickly that it was hard to find enough play space and yard space for children. And that's one of the things that's so amazing about downtown is it was growing so fast. It was adjusting to all these different technological changes in construction and in business and in the people coming through and absorbing waves of immigrants. And still, as they were doing all that, they built buildings that were designed not just for beauty in their day, but to enhance our lives in 2016.
And people know the Campbell House today, the Campbell House Museum. That's one of the few things left of Lucas Place today, right?
Yes, and it is spectacular. And we are so lucky to have both the Campbell House and the Eugene Field House as museums in downtown because they show us what residential character was like in the mid-19th century in downtown St. Louis.
In this next picture from your book, Downtown St. Louis, this is an old music store somewhere. And so I guess you'd go there for what, piano rolls and things?
This one was for piano rolls, but we were a center of music, the music industry. If somebody was playing a piano in a saloon in Texas, that piano came from St. Louis.
I was going to say, we made pianos here at one time.
We made pianos, we were music publishers. We were major music publishers, and the music industry moved in, kind of concentrated then on Olive Street. We had major music publishers before the Civil War, and then this just built up and built up to a huge business.
Let's talk about transportation. You know, I love those new metro buses. I don't know what they call them. You know, the two buses are sort of attached together.
Yes.
I'm sure there's a name for that I don't know. Well, look at this next shot from your book. This is so the opposite.
Isn't that fun? This is just a fun picture for its vitality and energy, and I gotta say, I love the straw hats. Aren't they great? And then the women are wearing those 1920s hats that just cling to their short new hairstyles. But the energy on that street and the double-decker buses, the streetcars, the cars, and then the foot traffic all over, the pedestrians like mad, that would have been lunchtime almost any day in various parts of downtown.
You mentioned the pedestrian traffic. That makes me think of something that you used to do. Washington Avenue, of course, today is pretty incredible, isn't it?
Oh, it's fabulous.
With the nightlife and then the people that live there and so forth. But you've been giving tours of St. Louis, tours of downtown St. Louis for something like 30 years?
Yes.
And isn't this right? At one time, this must have been a long time ago, you would take tours down Washington Avenue. You guys would walk down the middle of the street?
I would take them right down the center of the street. There was no activity, and we would look up at the cornices of these magnificent buildings that at that time were underutilized. Now they're almost all full of all sorts of activity. But we would walk down the center looking, and except for an occasional bus, we didn't have to dodge any traffic.
You'd have trouble on the sidewalk now.
Now, it's really a challenge, and I love it. And not only that, there are all the dog walkers. Late in the afternoon, you have all these residents come out and walking their dogs up and down Washington. It is just a series of great neighborhoods.
This next picture from your book is the coffee shop at Union Station.
Isn't that wonderful? And right across the street was the USO. One thing people don't realize or really think about today is that all the soldiers going to Jefferson Barracks, going to Scott Air Force, going to Fort Leonard Wood, they were coming through Union Station. And then we were a transfer point for people crossing the nation. So Union Station was packed with soldiers, and we operated great USOs to help them.
And I know they're kind of in the midst of kind of refiguring Union Station right now as far as marketing and stuff, so I hope all that works out.
Oh, it will, because, you know, we forget that things are in cycles. And but these great buildings just get recycled.
Let's look at the shot of the arch. This was from 1964 during the arch construction. Are you excited about what's happening down at the arch grounds now?
Oh, very excited. In fact, it's almost frustrating because you want to get there and really you can't wait for it to open up. But the arch has been a magnet on the riverfront from the very start of its construction. And the riverfront started to be forgotten way back with the dedication of Eads Bridge in 1874. And you see it being slowly neglected and forgotten, and then the construction of the arch has made it a focal point for not just St. Louisans, but the whole nation.
Let's look at this next shot, and this is the old Sticks, Bear, and Fuller. I guess if you're of a certain age, you remember the old Sticks, Bear, and Fuller. Of course, it didn't used to look like that.
Well, and I love this photo because it tells you that you can even spend hours and hours walking downtown and you don't know everything by any means. This is the lower floors of what was Sticks there's going to be the Blues Museum.
Right.
And then there's a hotel above it, and above that, we have apartments that look into this wonderful courtyard.
And you know, the Sticksbury and Fuller, of course, was an old department store that's been around for a long time. But I wanted to share one little story out of your book in conclusion because it ties into Sticksbury and Fuller and just kind of shows the human element. And you do a lot of this through your book, which makes it, I think, so interesting. You talk about a guy by the name of Henry Changer, and he was an immigrant from Poland. And I think he came over as a teenager, escaping the camps there. And he ended up working at the old Sticksbury and Fuller downtown. And he sold appliances, and he drove this old car around that always needed oil. Tell the rest of that story. He would go out and call on customers?
Well, first of all, the Chevy was what they called a bubble fender Chevy that leaked so much oil, he had to carry oil with him to keep refilling it. He'd go downtown, sell the modern state-of-art appliances, and then go to people's homes and show them how to adjust, how to use a new refrigerator with all these different meters and gauges on it and all.
Yeah, so can you imagine someone from the department store coming to your house these days and showing you how to turn the stove on?
And his file system, he wore a suit and tie every day, and he wrote little notes and pinned them to his suit. And that was his filing, was all pinned to his suit.
Nene, your book, Downtown St. Louis, is full of interesting stories and perspectives and photographs. Of course, it's obviously a labor of love for you.
Oh, it is. Downtown is a joy. And I hope that this helps people enjoy it and appreciate it, and for some, maybe helps them discover it.
Well, you've been, chronicling downtown St. Louis for a long time. Just in a few seconds, did you learn anything from researching this book you didn't know before?
Oh, you always do. You always do. I found the stories of Jewish survivors of camps like Henry Changer, who survived death camps and built new lives on Washington Avenue.
Well, Downtown St. Louis is the book. It's from Reedy Press. Nene Harris is the author. Have you got anything in the work? What's your next one? This is number 14. What's 15?
I can't say until I get more done. I get nervous about it. But no, I'm working on several books right now.
Are you?
Yeah, all about St. Louis.
Do you ever look for information that you can't find?
Sometimes, but then when you find something else that you didn't expect that takes you a different path.
Well, Nene Harris, Downtown St. Louis, your book is full of unexpected surprises, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of City Corner. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join us next time.